Alright, it's raining, but at least there's not the traffic noise. Okay, Gary, thanks for your contribution to this conversation, first of all. Second of all, I want to explain the idea of the chart. Okay, there's two important aspects of the chart. First of all, the chart, I'm not implying that single-celled creatures have emotions, and I described in my answer why I think they have analogous things, but even I think there's a threshold. Most people will stop the emotions at some level, and if not that, the thinking, all of these, and if nothing else, the rights, I would imagine, stop at some level, like at least at insects. And we think of insects a different way when we protect them, for example, the Endangered Species Act, not necessarily based on an empathetic thing, or, that's the question, what is it based on? So you're supposed to take that chart, which I'll put a link to an HTML version of it, um, and mark in there, where you think that phenomena starts. Or more detailed, which emotions, which things like that. And to change the chart. Really, each column is a question. Where among living things do you think this phenomena begins? And of course, there could be 50 columns. Where do you think that, as I mentioned, with emotions, well, there's a lot of different emotions. Where do we think empathy begins is going to be different from where we think love begins or something like that. Now, the second reason is, you've called me before on the fact that people will give dilemmas, and I often restructure the question. But I'm not a hypocrite. I want people to restructure the question. I think that's what we're really doing in the discussion, is narrowing the question. And as we narrow it in, I would suspect there's whole areas like, do animals feel love, that might not interest you or me? I'm interested that such a conversation goes on, though, and I'm great to provide the focus to allow a group of people to realize that there's something to focus on and debate just in that area. Meanwhile, there'll be other areas, rights, suffering, where you and others will be more interested and focused in. Someone like me, to a certain degree, I'll be in each one, because as a relativist, I like to get a picture of what I consider the whole argument, which is all the things all the people think are important. So we have to put on this chart possibilities that you might think ludicrous. See, all I put in the chart is the possibility that cells have emotion. But any category you create, we automatically, that's the point of putting it in 2 dimensions, we automatically have to ask that question. And that helps us to fill in the chart. For example, a lot of people are talking about, no animals actually have rights because they can't express them, they can't fight for them. But rights are given to people who can't speak up for themselves, to children, to people that are dispossessed or illiterate, whatever, that's what rights are for. So we have to be careful if we're saying, well, that's why the way we deal with humans custodially means that it's not even rights versus, it just means that we're the ones that have to ascertain what the rights are. So I think that the fundament is that something's living, really, that it's living. It has basically right to survive for its own right. And I think the second thing is it in conflict with humanity? It's a selfish criteria, but it's just like, hey, I have no problem with some guy in the street, but if he's trying to break into my house, I got a problem. So it's basically a fair criteria. And, so fire ants, we don't have to let them have habitats in the city, but maybe we shouldn't totally stamp them out. If we're enough at war with them, we might even stamp them out. Whereas, the hawk, very useful predator, no conflict with us. We should have habitats and help that animal inhabit our cities. And really, we should do the same for the tigers, but we can't let them just roam our cities. So we're going to control them, and it's out of self-interest. It's kind of like humanity still at war with nature in some areas. So that's how I do the fundament. If it was a matter of feeling suffering, we'll see. I think in your case, you've got all of the mammals and fish and birds covered. But what do you do? Why do we have Endangered Species Act for insects? Well, it's kind of maybe a self-interested reason because of the web of life arguments. Is that the way you'd go? Because if so, then that web of life argument, it works even for other humans. and it also explains why we come in conflict with them. So anyway, just to summarize, the idea with the chart is to get a play field of issues, some of which people will cluster around, but other people will go, that whole issue is ridiculous. Well, good. By clustering, the people that want to talk about that can talk about that. The people who want to talk about the other can talk about the other. And where I think it all comes together is in this rights issue. Why? Because that's a political issue. We all have to vote and decide what we're going to require, what we're going to advise, the ethics and morality and law that we want to impose or believe in that area. It's a shared thing. So if you think the issue is whether animals can be spiritual, or you think the issue is whether they feel suffering, or you think the issue is their intellectual capacity and neurological energy or whatever, you'll eventually have to apply that to, well, what rights are we going to give them? Right. So that's the idea, is to find out what is that atomic, because I agree with you, we're trying to find out what is this atomic element of our judgment here. And then that's what this is meant. That chart should be expanded if necessary, so that anybody with a view about animal cognition and sentimentality, emotion, could represent their view. You know, it's like a way of charting someone's view. It's not meant to be a view, except for, of course, there's this implicit thing of everything's possible. Well, that's not a view. That's an abstract, thinking technique where we put a big enough piece of paper that everybody can scribble on it. Some people scribble on the fantasy part of the paper, but we go ahead and have that fantasy part of the paper because that's a part of the discussion as well, if only to identify and isolate it, but also because there's more than one person with that sort of mentality on the subject, and they can discuss it among themselves, maybe even lead to a consensus that they need other elements to investigate with. All right, cheers.